Welcome to the stream, everybody. We're talking about the end of the book of Job and kind of summing it up and having a conversation about it before the Memorial Day weekend. And we'll be taking a break next week, and we'll be back in later in the middle of June. So you want to take it away, Pastor Diane?
I do indeed. Well, what we thought, because we had really finished reading the words of Job last week, but it's such a complicated book that it seemed to me the best thing to do, rather than to go into a short-term book study for a week, that we would probably be best suited by talking about the points that Job has for us today. It's a pretty complicated thing, and sometimes you have to look at it. And I was reading it again today as Job came into this whole thing. And for those of you who weren't part of it, remember there was a conversation between Satan and God, and God said, "Hey, how about my servant Job? He's like top of the line. He's right on the ball, does everything well." And Satan says, "Well, of course he does everything well. You've provided for him and he's got no complaints. So what is there about that?" And then we come to the point where things start happening for Job, and I was struck by my book anyway, has this phrase over and over again. When the angels came to present themselves, mine starts with one day. And then as Job gets his first test, when the sons and daughters were drinking and his cattle and oxen and all that started being taken away and the servants killed, that starts with one day. And then the second test was on another day. So, I tried to do it to find the time frame and how long it took Job to go through this whole thing. And I think when it's talking about one day and then on another day, you're not sure what the sequence of events, how much time there was in between. One thing we do know is when Job started being, the second part of his deal, if you're not aware of it, was he started developing sores over his whole body, thanks to our good man, the devil. So then his friends he had three friends come to him, and they sat with him in basically a garbage dump for a period of 7 days. So then a lot of this stuff that happens within a period of 7 days. Again, since we don't know the time frame, we don't know basically if it was, a few days, a few weeks, a few months that his whole saga started. But there's some things that I think, and I'm going through a list of what I think we could learn from that. And one of the lessons is, remember, Job's suffering didn't come because of anything he had done, right? Because he was unwavering in his faithfulness to God. That's what the scripture tells us. So that brings me into a question that I think a lot of church people have all off and on when they're in their discussions to me. Why do bad things happen to good people?
To good people.
Yeah. And the thing of it is, that never gets answered. I think the point of it is, bad things happen to good people. Whether you think sin came into the world through Adam and Eve, I think we have enough in our lives to, how should we say, not live the right path one way or the other. But there's also choice. And I think myself, when we started rebelling against God, that's when the bad things came in. It didn't take long, right? Adam and Eve did it, and then it was followed right behind by Cain killing Abel. So it didn't take people long to come into sin. But bad things happening to good people. What do you think about that deal? What do you think this book of Job has taught you about bad things happening to good people?
Well, it shows that Job never lost his faith, even though he lost everything except his wife, what I read today. But he lost his children and all of his animals and stuff, but he never turned against God.
Right.
His faith still held.
So to me, if I'm hearing you, he's saying, yeah, it's not about, and originally in the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, as the Israelites were facing all of their creation and coming into it, that, it was believed that if you do things right and you're faithful, you're going to prosper. But clearly the book of Job, which isn't that far into the Old Testament, starts saying, well, maybe that's not the case. And indeed, that is not the case. Bad things happen to good people, bad people, and anywhere in between. It just happens. That's what I feel. Do any of the rest of you have any thoughts on that are different?
No, I
I
feel,
think,
oh, go ahead, Kate.
I was going to say, I think people, and even today, feel if they're good, then they deserve goodness in return. And that's not the way it works.
That's
A
an
reward
interesting.
is in heaven or hell, depending on where you go. And, they justify it, I think, I don't remember at what point they say that, the sins of the father will be visited on the sons or on the children.
Second and third generation, yeah. But that's an interesting word you pick up. They deserve good things if they do good things. Yeah, I don't know every one of us that can say we were as faithful as Job apparently was, according to the way God describes him. I mean, if God's bragging about him, I would say he has to be pretty faithful and pretty upright, right?
Right.
And all the
It
time.
almost seems like God is irking the devil on to do whatever.
I don't know about urging. I think he's giving him permission, because I think God has something to prove to Satan, because Satan says, of course he's doing well. Look at all the good things. And might say
I
that
think God is challenging Satan.
yeah. And I
Okay.
think Job is the one through whom the whole world learned this lesson. If you really study the book of Job, right? Because Roxy's right. He never wavered in his faithfulness through all of this, right?
Right.
Right.
And here's the man suffering pretty terribly. I mean, from what we're hearing, he's scraping his wounds and doing everything he can to try to heal them. And it occurs to me as I'm reading in chapter 13, Job had a moment when he said, though God slay me, I will hope in him.
Yeah.
So here's a man suffering terribly. He's a faithful man. And he goes on to question, but he never questions his faith in God. He never comes really to the point where he's saying, God, you're what's going on here, and I'm going to turn against you. And if you go into prayer, then you ask yourself, and this is a discussion, do you think every time you pray for things that you should get what you pray for?
Yeah.
Okay, take that further, Kate. What do you mean, yes?
A lot of people believe, well, this isn't biblical, but it seems a lot of people believe it, especially kids. If I pray for a puppy for Christmas, I'm going to get one. And maybe that doesn't apply here, but, why did I not get what I prayed for?
Well, that might be a question. I wonder, though, to me, I don't think it's something that's unique to kids, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I agree.
We mostly, what would you say percentage-wise of your prayers are asks, as opposed to praising God?
Probably about 50-50.
What do you guys think? If you're praying to God, what percentage of it is asking God for something as opposed to praising God for something?
I think it's changed. I think when you're younger, It's probably mostly asking, but I think as you get older, maybe more mature in your faith, you do more of the praising. I don't know. I might still be at 50-50, but I hopefully a little bit better on the praising. But
I have to agree with Tim, actually. It's I think is very wise to say, because I know that as a kid that I was more came to him as I would say my praises in the like normal I always say, and then here's the things that I'd like to like to happen. And then now more recently I feel like I praise more than I ask for things.
yeah,
But I would say it's still probably 50-50 if you really split the hairs.
Yeah, well, if you look at prayers, praise is supposed to come first. The asking is supposed to come second. And I honestly think that some of us, we ask and we praise only when we get.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of times when you're praying for other people. Please help this person, or please watch over that person. It's not that you're praying for material possessions.
Well, yeah, all prayers don't have to be material possession. I would say a relatively small amount of them are for material possessions. I think you're right, though. Intercessory prayer is a bit of an ask. It's just an ask for something else, someone else. So you think that prayer is a little more altruistic than when you ask for your own?
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's always better to be asking to benefit somebody else than yourself.
I think it depends on what you ask for yourself. If you're asking for wisdom, patience, I don't think God sees that any differently than God sees you praying for someone else.
yeah,
Because in essence, you're praying God to help you be like God would have you be. Right?
Right.
that's true.
So what part of your heart do you think enters into that? Is there such a thing as just praying with words, and then such a thing as praying with your heart?
Well, I don't know what good praying does if you're not doing it with your heart. If you don't mean it,
Good point.
if you mean what you're praying for, then you're doing it from the heart.
And if you honestly think, are you saying if you honestly think it's something that God would want you to pray for?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking maybe that's a litmus test. Something I really should pray for. I would think if you can't, and just a guess, if you can't, you don't have the money to pay for your apartment or money to feed your kids, that's for physical needs, but you're asking for it for an altruistic point of view, right?
Right.
Yeah. But Job never loses his hope in God through all of this misery that he's gone through. And I can't say that I would be right there with him in that solid of a thing. You know, you never know till you go through something, but yeah. And then, you know, you admire me. I admire people who have gone through hell and back, to say it in a way that's gives you the extent to which I think it, but yet they praise God for what God brings them and makes them what they are. Right?
Yeah, and maybe in retrospect, that empowers. I mean, that says a lot for their testimony. I mean, a lot of this is God bringing good out of evil, and so in situations like that, there's a lot to be said for how the testimony of those people. So,
yeah, and you know what? Let's talk about Job's friends for a minute, right? They were all over the place through all of this misery that he suffered, right? Right? So you can say, yeah, they were looking for him, saying, you must have fouled up and you must have been doing something. That's the way they started, because God is all righteous and you just must be wrong. And because God never creates misery. Well, okay. And Job actually said, and I'm looking at chapter 16:2. He says, he talks about where his strength flows, and he says, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand on earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God." So he's saying, you're going to see the Christ after that, passing on into the other world, right? And that's one of the things I think that's supposed to bring us peace. We know that something may make us suffer and kill the body, but it's not going to affect our spirit. So that's something I think we learned from Job a little bit too.
Yeah.
He's a pretty smart guy. So whatever we do, if we're trying to live in the right way, and there's a song I love, it's called Grace, I think. And it's basically God coming back to you when you failed God. And he says something like, "As long as you seek my face, you'll live in the power of my daily sufficient grace."
Wow.
So what that song is saying is, it's not always the doing, but it's the trying. And in the trying, you know that you're ultimately going to be victorious because you will have done everything that God is asking you to do, at least to the best of your abilities. I can't tell you how many times in my entire life I have praised God that God rewards the trying as opposed to the accomplishing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Right. So there sits Job going through all this bantering back and forth with his friends. And even though God is not saying, "This is what I'm doing for you, Job," or "This is what I'm trying to teach you, Job," God is there. Even as Job is wrestling through all of this suffering and he's saying, "Why, God? Why? Tell me why?" God is in the presence with him. God hasn't stepped back and said, "Well, I'm just going to wash my hands of you, Job, because you're sort of like a pain in the neck," for lack of better words. God never does that. He just sits and patiently waits. Right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yep. So God is with us even when we don't know it. And God was with Job through all of these storms that he went. I mean, to lose your I don't want to say farm because I can't picture what it was, but to lose all of your herds. And then at the same time, when people came to steal their herds, they killed all their people. So he lost all of his servants. You might as well, he said he came from a rich person to a pauper really quick, right? Relatively.
Mhm.
And then what happens? Then his family's taken away from him. So that bugger has been in a real storm. So what about all of you? Have you seen those storms where you know that God is with you? I know that you have, Roxy.
Yes, I have.
I mean, that time when you were so ungodly sick and people thought you had even died, God was there.
Yes, he was. Or I wouldn't be here.
And I've seen people survive abuse. I've seen, people survive all kinds of things that happen to them. And in a lot of cases, and albeit some of it depends on attitude, which Job, I guess you can argue back and forth what Job's attitude really was, right? Because he didn't lose his faithfulness, but he was still saying, "Hey, God, what are you doing here? I'm good. Why did you do this?" So I've seen people turn bad things into good things with God's help, right? God walks with us. God gives us courage. God leads us. And when things don't go all too well, God is there with us, trying to catch us. I'm picturing somebody jumping on a high wire or high rope, and there's a net underneath. So I think God helps us through all the storms. I think I learned that pretty good. Tony, I mean, you and Heather faced it, right?
Yeah. I mean, we faced it in different ways. I was a support and she was going through it. And so, a lot of times being support, you can't really control the situation. And all you can try to do is help. And so, I feel like God was with me through that, because I was able to really trust that I was doing the right thing, and trust that the doctors knew what they were doing, and that I could feel confident to tell Heather that she's going to be okay.
So what you're trying to say is your trust in God led you focus on what you thought what you're pretty sure was going to happen, probably because did you experience a calmness within you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That calmness let you know that God was with you and in this whole thing through you and Heather. Right?
Yes.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
And not for anything, unless I'm mistaken, I think God has made you and Heather prosperous enough that you could do some pretty amazing things in your time.
Absolutely.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Including snuggling that little one you just were a few minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. What about you, Tim, when you were adopting your girls?
Probably the hardest time was actually just thinking about this as Tony was sharing. When my one daughter had anorexia really, really badly, and I know some of you know the story, but it was really touch and go there for a while. In fact, after we had taken her out to Pittsburgh, and after a few weeks there, they just said, well, we've done everything we can do. Here's a book for you. And we thought, oh boy. Anyway, yeah, God led us through that. There was a terrible storm. A lot of prayer, but a lot of peace through all that. And certainly that was a situation where we felt God's presence, and he brought us through it. So.
Yeah, but that peace that you're again feeling that peace within you because you think God is in it, and you feel God is in it.
Oh,
That's, yeah.
Absolutely.
I went through the same thing when I lost my job after 41 years. I mean, I was 2 years from retiring, and I had, how should we say, given pretty much all of my life as much as I could to my job. You know what I mean? I was there 2:00 in the morning if they needed me to be there. And managing people, I was there through one young lady adopted a young daughter. And about 5 weeks after that they started the adoption, the mother decided that she wanted the child back.
Oh my God.
And
That would be terrible.
Yeah. And I had a situation where I had to tell somebody that their mother had passed. And helping women through adulterous husbands and all that kind of stuff. And you just have to look past it and see where God is in it. And time again, people would come and, they would need time or be upset because I remember one of my friends, Kelly, her father died very, very young of cancer, and her grandfather was the father figure in her life. And he was to a point where they thought he was going to pass. And she was hysterical. She said, I can't lose him. I can't lose him. And I said, Kelly, first of all, let's pray. And then don't get ahead of yourself, and the gentleman was around for another 6 years. So
look at yourself with your sister. A year ago in January, you thought that was it. And she's still with you.
Yeah, I didn't expect more than a day or two.
Right, because I was on my way to Florida and I called Rhett to see what was happening.
I know, and it's all kind of scary. And there'll be times, Tony, I think, as you're raising Asher, that you won't be 100% sure what to do. So what's your plan when that happens?
Well, make sure you got a fever. You talk to the doctor, but but definitely I have to lean on God, as like I was saying with Heather. I mean, he's prepared me through all these challenges to help me try to be a better person and be there and be mindful that, when he's growing up and he has these things happening to him that maybe I can't even help, I can try to just make sure he knows that God can be there for him as well. Maybe share my experiences.
Yeah, so you're saying you're going to be a mentor to him through his faith life too.
Mhm.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's not an easy thing to do unless a child is raised in that thought. I mean, once somebody's 26, 28, it's not that God can't do miracles. It's just that they can't see the miracles as easily as if they see them when they're young,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. Yeah, and youth stretches. In my opinion, youth stretches out further nowadays too. Stretches to 30s and on.
Oh, geez, you mean I'm only halfway through?
I mean that in the sense of, like thoughts of almost being immune to everything and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. I don't,
Invincible.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that lasts into about 55. And after you hit 56, then you start thinking,
Yeah.
that's the truth.
Yeah, mine lasted till I was 62 and had my first stroke. And then it was like, oh, okay.
But you had pretty tough straits for a while too, and things got better for you. I mean, your medicines were started to take a little better control, and you
Mhm.
even sort of became independent through the whole thing because, and now you get on that had to go bus and you take off and go places.
Yes. And it's fun. It gives me more people to talk to. I'm sorry. Now I'm blabbing about my life. It's fun.
No. That's exactly sort of what Job went through. He lost a lot, and you lost a lot. I mean, Jesus, not only that, look back when your fiance was killed.
Yeah.
I mean, that like forever changed your life, right?
Yes, it did.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't only him that was hurt in that accident.
No, he had 3 brothers in the car with him, and the one was killed outright, and the 2 in the back seat one was badly hurt and one was minorly hurt and went through a lot of guilt because of that.
Yeah.
It was a mess.
Why did he survive, sort of thing? And how old were you when all that happened?
I had just turned 30.
Yeah.
Huh.
What about scars? Isn't it interesting that scars are no longer open wounds? That scars are wounds that are healed over and something you carry with you to remind you of that wound. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I'd like to mention something that's out of the Lord's Prayer, which is a good bit more modern than the Job, but it changes things, especially when you go to this phrase that says, "Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors," and that's a change in the picture of hurting people. Well, how does that fit with Job?
Well, that's a pretty interesting thought. I mean, and I'm just going to take you back and sort of confound your question before we kick it around. Because, some people say debts, some people say trespasses, which is a little different, and other people say sins. So you have debts, which says, hey, you owe me something. And trespasses means, you need to be forgiven because you've stepped all over somebody. And sin, that widens it up. You sin not only before people, but before God. I guess I'm going to go first on answering that question. And I get to the point sometimes where I speak too much and listen not enough. I've always thought, we talk about Christ, and I talked about this a little bit with Ralph today. We talk about God sending Christ to die. I don't like that phrase. I don't really know that it's true. I think God he knew Christ was coming to earth, and since God knows everything from now into perpetuity, God knew what we humans would do, that we wouldn't give up our authority so quickly. And he probably knew that we would end up crucifying Christ. So as God often does, he turned something bad into something good, like he did with Jesus. But, and I've told you guys from the pulpit, if you got done crucifying me the way you did Christ, I can't imagine him standing before people and saying, peace be with you. I think my words might have been a little harsher, but then I think that goes to show us, to demonstrate to us human relationships, because we know we're going to step on each other bad time, and we know we're going to sin bad time. But if God can forgive us the horrendous way we treated the Son of God, then shouldn't we forgive each other for the same thing? And not only that, ain't one of us been without sin, not one. So I think that talks about, when you're talking about forgive us our debts, our trespasses, or our sins, as we forget people who have done this to us, we're saying, we need to be forgiven, and we need to forgive. Because have any of you, you're human, so I guess this is kind of a crazy question because I'm on board with it. But have you ever done something that you knew, oh man, I really fouled up, I really hurt this person or that person, and they've forgiven you? Doesn't that make you wouldn't that make you want to be more forgiving in your relationships?
I don't know.
Tony's shaking his head yes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes being forgiven by somebody can be a mixed bag. Depends on how your feelings are about it. Overall, as time goes on, you are like, okay, that you let it go and it feels good, and it helps you be able to, even in those the hurt moments when your ire is up, you have to like relax and try to like know that you need to forgive and not make it worse.
Well, yeah, I know. Listen, I'm human. If I had to count all of those things before God, and that's kind of a crazy thing. Are you gonna stand there and God says, "Do you remember when?" I'm going, oh boy. But yeah, you just think, oh my gosh, if somebody can forgive me of this, how can I not forgive this person? And then the other thing is not forgiving and hanging. I've talked to people that hang on to hurt like a lifesaver.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the little ones you put in your mouth. I'm talking about the whopper ones that help you swim. It just chains them in. It binds them with chains that only they can loose. Right? And forgiveness is a crazy thing that way. So, Ralph, now we've talked about that a few minutes. Have we sort of gone down the path that you think we're called to go down on that?
Well, I do, but one of the things that I'd like to hear is the story of Job is different than the story that we get from the Lord's Prayer. Does the Lord's Prayer and its examples cause us to think differently about Job?
You mean as it relates to his friends trying to help him, but not really helping him, sort of piling on?
Well, whatever happens in Job.
Okay, well, we know what happens in Job. And I'm not, that sounded nasty and I didn't mean it to. We know from what we've read that Job was, tested, and his friends tried to help him figure it out. And they tried to, because they said, listen, we know that God is good, so it must have been you, right? But Job's friends, they did fail him, if that's what you're talking about, right? They weren't necessarily supporting him in a loving way, but they were giving him sort of bad advice. But the question is, in my mind, is why? Were they really trying to help? Were they just talking after whether they have 3 days without saying anything? Why did they come against it? And the ultimate clue to that may be, remember at the end, the Lord doesn't let them off the hook. The Lord says, my anger burns against you and your friends, against you and your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what's right, as Job did. So, but God's not us forgiving. The Lord's Prayer is talking about us. So I don't know. What do the rest of you think? Does the Lord's Prayer relate in any way to Job's situation? At least the part of it that
But at least I think it does to the fact that God is saying, forgive the other people because somewhere along the line you must have done sin somewhere and I've forgiven you.
So you think that his friends pointed out to him that there has been forgiveness amongst them when they did things wrong?
Yes, I think his friends were trying to get him to see that somewhere along the line he must have done some kind of a sin, that he wasn't better than them.
Oh, I see. Well, there might be that aspect of it, you know, because at one point he might have even said that, now that I'm thinking about it, right?
In other words, his friends were saying, hey, you're no better than us. You had a lot more riches and you were wealthier than we were, but you're no better than us.
Yeah, and now when he crashed, people didn't even want to talk to him or see him or anything else.
Right.
No.
That's a good point. Yeah, they thought, okay, he must really be a bad guy that God did this to him. So they thought, oh yeah, he probably, if he didn't before, he had something to forgive them about, you know. And that's the one thing when we blame God. Have you ever done any of that, blaming God? That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, but it's natural tendency to question. You're not supposed to, but you do. Why did this happen?
Yeah. Been there, done that.
Right.
Yeah, that's the big thing, because you think if God is good and God is love, how, if you're trying to love God, did these things happen to you? And the bottom line here is, and I've preached a few sermons where I said, bad things do not come from God. These mass shootings, they're humanity. You know,
They are.
and I talked with a bunch of pastors when we were talking about atonement. And I said, you know, one of the things we have to trust God for is the better outcome. The better outcome may not be for us, but maybe someone else reaps the benefit of that better outcome by what they see.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, I think the difficulty for me with the book of Job is that I believe just in what you were saying, Pastor Diane. I'll go back to something I've been thinking about. Somewhere in the New Testament, Jesus said that Satan is the prince. He called Satan the prince of this world. I mean, the prince of this world. It's not like Jesus said, well, I'm still in control and everything that's going to happen here is it's almost like because of the sin of Adam and Eve, at least in my opinion, sin entered the world, and Satan, this is pretty much Satan's place. So bad things, I mean, at random even, bad things will happen. And I don't think it's, and so I agree with you. I don't think it's because God planned them that way. But unfortunately, in the book of Job, God does permit, I mean, I don't believe that God permits bad things to happen. I think bad things, just because of this is Satan's world, bad things do happen and they will happen. But unfortunately, in Job, he does allow this something to happen. So I think it makes a harder case for people to argue. But I believe the same way you do.
Just looking back here. You know, we do not know who wrote the book of Job.
What I read today said that a lot of people believe Job himself wrote it.
Yeah, it might be that they're talking about that, but the other thing is, and here's one of the things I say, and in my heart I believe this. Maybe Job went through all of this for our benefit. Maybe God allowed it for our benefit. I mean, here we are,
that's
7 or 8 of
interesting.
us reading the book of Job, taking out of it some pretty important things about our relationship to God.
Yeah.
Right. And this is another example for me. My mother-in-law died of liver cancer, and she went through some pretty horrific pains. And she said to me one day, "Why is all of this happening?" She was a good woman, smartest woman I ever met. And I looked at her and I said, "Mom, think about this." I said, "Maybe God knows that we love you so much that the only way we won't be able to accept your death is if we know it's a blessing to you to get you out of pain." She was suffering so that perhaps, and I don't presume to know God, but what God was thinking in that particular case, but maybe she was suffering to help us understand that her death was important for her to happen when it did and the way it did. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think if one thing the book of Job teaches me is it's trusting God. Trusting that something, even in the midst of all of this, is something we should know. Right? It's
Hmm.
you have to remind yourself when difficulty comes who God is. And your heart tells you that because you've experienced God through it. You trust God because you've seen God be trustworthy time and time again. Tony's seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Roxy's seen it.
Yeah.
You know, I bet you've all seen it at one point in time. And not only in one big way, but in lots of little ways. Right?
Mhm.
So then you have to sort of trust and understand that whatever it is, God is in it in one way or the other. Certainly, even if it's only for the fact that you go to God to try to make sense of it. And the other thing that I think I see in this is when all of this happens, after all of this that they went through, Job still maintained his faithfulness, right? Now, God did at the end say to him, you know, "Job, it's me, I'm God, you know, what's with you complaining about me?" But even through all of that, when it was all done, what did God do to Job? Reinstated his thing.
Yeah.
Yes, right. He reinstated all of his blessings. He rewarded Job's faithfulness. Right?
Right.
So, boy, that has eschatological implications written all over it. End times. And, you know, if we believe we stand before our Maker, is God going to say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant"? Or is God going to say, go to the end of the line? I'm just kidding. But there is that sense of our faithfulness being rewarded in heaven, in our afterlife. I never did understand about the crowns of heaven. And if Melanie was here, I'd tell her to look it up. Because you're rewarded different crowns in heaven. I really don't even remember what they were. But there was Job, and ultimately Job said to God, "You're right, God. I'm wrong." And look at this. I'm going back to the end of because I marked this as I was reading through it. Exactly what Job said. Let me go in again. Oh, here he is. in chapter 40. The Lord was speaking to Job, and then Job spoke back to the Lord. 40 verse 3, he says, then Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. So Job is humbling himself ultimately before God for questioning and putting God sort of to say, tell me what it is. Ultimately, Job repents and takes on a robe of humility, I guess, if you will, right?
Okay, here's the crowns that are given in heaven. The crown
Okay.
of life, incorruptible crown, crown of righteousness, crown of glory, and crown of rejoicing.
Does your thing say anything about how that all happens, or just the names of them?
Well, that
Because-
part just gave the names. What's the purpose of their being rewarded crowns? Let's see what that one says. The Bible
Is this
mentions
been-
rewards in heaven multiple times, but why are rewards necessary? Won't being in heaven with God be enough? Experiencing Him, His glory, and the joys of heaven will be so wonderful. It's hard to understand why extra rewards would be needed. God will give rewards in heaven at the Bema, B-E-M-A, or the judgment seat of Christ, based on our faithfulness in service to Him. The rewards will show the reality of our sonship and the justice of God. God will give rewards in heaven in order to fulfill the law and make good on His promise that our labor in the Lord is not in vain.
There you go. That's
This
interesting.
is biblical? Is this like in Revelation or?
Yeah.
Well, this mentions Matthew, chapter 5, verse 12,
Oh.
Luke chapter 6, verse 23 and 35.
Hmm.
So this particular article gives you different biblical or different Bible references.
The one in Matthew.
Okay,
What's the one in Matthew?
Matthew
five.
chapter 5, verse 12.
5:12. Let's see
Hmm.
see what the context is if we can. Oh, this is part of the Beatitudes. 5 verse 12. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you falsely against all kinds of evil. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. There you go.
The rewards we gain in heaven are not like the rewards we earn here on earth.
Okay,
Well, that's pretty interesting.
In this way, rewards in heaven glorify God and provide us with joy, peace, and wonder as we consider God's work in us and through us.
Well, yeah, I mean, ultimately, if we expect there's a new heaven and a new earth, I would assume God has a plan for us. And I've teased sometimes, and I said, I hope there's more to do in heaven than sing, because if there is, man, it'd be bad for me. I'm just kidding.
yeah,
It'll be bad for the other people. And, I've often asked myself, okay, this human life, and as Ralph says, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Will we also continue to learn at Jesus' knee when we're in heaven? I can't imagine we know everything we need to know while we're here on earth.
Nobody ever knows it all except God.
I know. That's what I'm saying. So maybe we continue to be taught.
I think so.
Yeah, I would hope so. So God accepted Job's heart because he was humble and repentant And Job basically surrendered to God and said, okay, you're right, God. I wasn't thinking about all of this. So after he repented, he received forgiveness, and then he even got some blessings put upon him.
Mhm.
So I think that brings us to the end of kicking everything around. But where I want to go next is, has this summarizing what happened in the book been a help for us along the way in our study? Because I got the sense for myself that if we just said, okay, the end, we wouldn't have wrapped it up in a bow so we made sense of it. That's why I wanted to do let's go back and see what lessons this whole thing has.
Yeah.
Have you found that helpful?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we make that part of our modus operandi.
Yeah, at the end of every book or whatever.
Well,
Yeah.
it'd be kind of tough to do it through Genesis in a book. You'd have to do it in pieces of it.
Yeah.
Pieces.
In pieces.
Pieces.
Oh my.
Have to.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I think so.
We'll have a week off, and then the next thing is what we want to study next. And how might we want to widen this? Roxy's been telling me something about her grandson asking questions about angels and sexual preferences and all of that kind of thing. Are you looking still to study some more books of the Bible? And have you thought about where to go, or do you want to just make it be a surprise in a couple of weeks?
One of
I
the things, I think if our church is going to try to take steps to be an open and affirmed church, we need to study it a little bit so that we better understand it.
Okay, now let me just first say that open and affirming is more than just LGBTQ rights.
Yeah, I know.
Open and affirming is being open to all people.
Right. That includes people that have mental disabilities, medical disabilities.
Autism, physical
Yes.
disabilities, all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, I've reached out to the conference to say, this is what we've done. Can you guide us? I don't know if there are any books to go through the whole thing. And I certainly wouldn't want to get ahead of the committee that's on it, but maybe there's some ideas we can kick around. And one of the things that we've talked about a lot is what the Bible says on LGBTQ people. Right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And well, let me think about that. But you got some points there. And I was taken about your grandson's question about angels. Somebody told him angels were fearsome creatures as far as, ugly and nasty and all that. And boy, that's just not what I get from an angel. Hi, Phyllis. How are you?
Well, I'm okay. Another area I would love to explore and for discussion and so on would be to study St. John. We look around our little community and we've got 4 churches named St. John. And I'd love to study St. John to tell me why.
Well, St. John is a pretty cool dude. Roxy, maybe if we do LGBTQ, we might be getting ahead of things. Maybe St. John might be a better way to go.
I'm see.
What do the rest of you think? St. John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Yes,
That's some pretty interesting theology for us there, Tim.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I'm assuming you mean like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, because
Yeah.
John there's 1st and 2nd John later on down the line. So
Right.
you want to study the book of John.
The book of John first, and then we could look at those other books because they're very short.
Well,
See
not
how
only
they
that,
relate.
they're very interesting too.
And see how they relate to what he wrote in the gospel part.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so John starts with creation, of course, and then he goes into choosing the disciples. And then he has a conversation with Nicodemus. The Samaritan woman is an interesting one, particularly considering we have that big old window splashed right at us. That's pretty cool. But that one starts, that would be 1 to 4. If we do all of that, it would be 1 to chapter 4, I think. Philip and Nathaniel, Nicodemus, testimonies. Okay. Let's try John 1 to 4.
Okay.
It's not super amount of the pages. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, but it's theologically rich.
Yeah, it's got a lot of stuff in it.
Sounds
A lot
good.
of
Yes.
a lot of stuff.
Lot of stuff.
You know, and then we got the Samaritans and all that kind of thing. So let me have a look at the dates, because we're going to skip next week, but then we're going to pick up the week after that. And I want to be silly and say, well, good Lord willing, the creek don't rise.
Next Wednesday's the 3rd, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds good.
No,
Next Wednesday's the 2nd.
second.
Oh,
It's the 2nd.
So
yeah.
we'll convene on June 6th or June 9th.
9th, that's the 2nd, yeah. That's
Yeah.
2 Wednesdays from now.
Mhm.
Wait a minute. Okay, let me think about that. Do we have a conversation with Nathan on the 9th, Phyllis, do you know?
Let me
I think
look
it's the 15th. I think it's the 15th.
I think it is. Just a second. I'll pop up my calendar here. Okay, well, maybe I will.
Yeah, let me see what I got here.
Yeah.
The 15th is a Tuesday.
Okay,
Yeah, empowerment team is on Tuesday, the 15th.
okay, so we'll meet then on June the 9th, same bat time, same bat channel.
Okay, June 9th, and we're going to do John. And what chapters did you
1
say?
through 4,
Okay.
and we'll start at 7 the same way we did before. And I have one thing, Tony, it might be, and if you think not perfectly, just say no, and I'm fine with that. Tony and I wrestled with the mission statement last night. Right, Tony?
Yeah.
And do you want to run it past our group here as a, how should we say, a test group?
Sure. Let me try to get it up quick so I can make sure I quote it correctly.
And while Tony's trying to search it out, and this is facetious, but it's the reason. Do you want to sign us out first, Tony?
Yeah, sure. Well, for those out there on the internet, we'll see you in a 2-week span. So next week, you'll have to maybe read ahead, John chapters 1 through 4. All right, everyone. Have a good night.